now that we've covered the basic layout of an HTML document, we're going to move on to actually filling in our body section with some actual tags. I'm going to run through like a good majority of the basic tags that are most likely to be used, and at least the ones that I've used the most in my development experience. There's certainly more that there are certainly new ones that are come available in HTML5. Personally, I've not ever used those tags, but I'll give you a website of reference to go to just so you can check out what those new tags are, and you can spend time learning those on your own time. But for right now, I'm just going to cover some of the basic tags. These are things that be essentially quick and dirty, get you to jump in and understand like how some of these basic tags work, and give you enough to get started and do something and see some output right away. So with that said, one of the first tags that we're going to cover is what is known as header tags. So I'm going to go ahead and just type in hello. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy this. So header tags are kind of unique. These are still useful today in modern web development, but I don't know how often people would really be using these, to be honest. But I do know that they certainly are used and can be useful at times. A header tag might be used for, you want to have like a bigger font, a bigger text item at the top of a given section. I messed this one up, H3. So header tags, and I feel like eventually this might go away in HTML, to be honest, just because why have 5 of these things? I mean, it's basically just font, and you can basically accomplish this with another tag in CSS, cascading style sheets. But for the time being, just know that these exist. So you have H1 through H5. As you would suspect, 1 is the highest, essentially, and 5 is the lowest. So the font doesn't actually increase as you get higher, it actually decreases, I believe. And this thing, maybe it'll prove me wrong, but I'm pretty sure it decreases as you get higher up in the number. So H1 is the biggest text, and then H5 is the smallest title text. And we'll see as we work on more tags why this is relevant, and how some of these other tags may not be very useful in comparison to just using the standard other standard tags, and also using CSS to accomplish the same thing. So we created these H1 through H5. I saved the document, so I'm going to go ahead and open this thing up. So again, I still have my session of Google Chrome. So here we go. So this is basically what this generated. So I am correct in that. So H1, this is H1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. Now notice the one thing is that these are actually bold, and I'll prove that out, but notice that these things are in fact bold. All of them are bold. It's just a different essentially size of text. That's really all it is. So that's what H1 and H5 is. And again, like you might use that to, if you have like a title of a document, for example, that you want to display in the page, like my cool, or maybe if you title of your website, my cool web page, if you wanted to put that here, for example, and save that, and we can refresh this web page, it'll say my cool web page at the top. You could have, different displayed in different, font, essentially. So that's essentially what this is, what a H1 through H5 do. So again, that's covers that. The next one, next tag we're going to cover is known as the paragraph tag. So paragraph is just the letter P, and this is a paragraph, if I can spell. And the closing tag, of course, you remember, I always want to have your opening and closing tags, H1 through H5. So instead of, and this is one cool thing, if you keep your web page open, you don't need to keep closing it. To save time, you don't need to keep closing it down and then reopening the page. You can essentially just edit the document, save it. It won't take effect immediately, but if you refresh in Chrome, reload, or press F5 as a keyboard shortcut, it will reload this web page for you. So now you have, this is a paragraph. So let's cover something first before we go too much further. So a paragraph tag, you say, okay, well, just put the text down there, and so what? Like, what's the big deal, right? I'll show you what the big deal is. So let's say I just put some plain text in here. This is not going to be in any tag. It's basically, as far as HTML is concerned, it's between the body tags. There's no other tags that this text will fall in between. So I'm going to just take the same text here. This is a paragraph with no tags. Okay, I'm going to save that. I'm going to refresh this page. And so now we have, this is a paragraph with no tags, and then this is a paragraph. So and we say, cool, so I just inserted this thing down here, right? This text that we put in here. So now I'm going to take the same text. This is another paragraph with no tags. So simplistically speaking, you'd think, okay, well, this is one line, this is another line, this is just another line that just happens to have this HTML wrapped around it, right? This should all work the same, right? Refresh this page and wait, what happened here? I've got, in my HTML, I have, this is a paragraph with no tags, a line feed, or I hit the enter key, and on the next line I have, this is another paragraph with no tags. But the way that HTML is rendering it is it's saying, it's putting them side by side. Well, that's because without these paragraph tags or other tags surrounding these two sentences, this is just plain text to HTML. So basically all this white space that falls in between this sentence and the one below it is collapsed. So that is why HTML tags are extremely relevant when it comes to documents. So you can't just put a bunch of text in here and, you know, double space it and put a bunch of, you know, hit enter a bunch of times to try to space it. It doesn't matter. Like, I could put as many spaces as possible in here, and if I refresh it, it doesn't change anything about how the content is displayed. So that's one thing about HTML which might be kind of annoying to you, but it's the way it is. So if you wanted to actually properly space this stuff out and actually have paragraphs, you could do something like this. You would just do multiple paragraph tags. Then if you and save the document, of course, don't forget to always save and refresh. If you refresh and you don't see your changes and you thought you made the changes correctly, always go back to Notepad++, make sure that you saved the document, and then come back to your web page and refresh it. So I refresh it, and now that I've got my paragraph tags there, now it is formatting my text appropriately. So that is how a paragraph tag works. Now, I'm going to show you something interesting. This is where we're going to get into dev tools. Dev tools can be a lifesaver when it comes to understanding how your document is being formatted, in addition to other programmatic type things that we'll get into down the line with JavaScript. But for now, for the time being, web development tools can help you tremendously when it comes to understanding, again, how and why your document looks the way it does. So the easiest way to get to dev tools is you want to go to you can go to more tools and developer tools. Now Chrome gives you a tooltip here that says Control Shift and I for dev tools. So you could click this, use Control Shift or I, or the alternative is on your keyboard, just hit the F12 key. And the F12 key will bring up this little bar at the bottom. Essentially, this is your development tools. And your development tools, it actually has multiple levels, but you can drag this bar up and down so it can take up as much space as you want or as little space as you want, to the point where you don't see anything. Now, the reason why I wanted to show you this, again, is to understand, this can help you understand why your document may look the way it looks. So if you click, the simplest thing, the only thing we're going to do with DevTools right now is use the select an element on the page to inspect it, and the sources tab. So first thing we can do is just click the sources tab, and because you have this one page and it's local, you should see it listed in the folder, or view folder explorer, if you will, here, or this hierarchy. You can go ahead and double click that page, Now also in here, this kind of gets in the way initially is your watch bar. If it is in the way, you can drag this over to the right for now. I wouldn't collapse anything because you're going to want to need it later. So don't go and hide everything or do something where you can't actually see or easily navigate to these things later on when we need them. So once you've done that, if you look in Chrome, you'll notice that you can see the content of your HTML page. Now it's not going to give you syntax highlighting. Actually, it kind of does. If you double click on one, then it shows you the end tag. So if you double click on the beginning tag, it'll show you the end tag and vice versa. So that's a way to see how things line up in Chrome. Another neat feature, especially for bigger documents in Chrome, is if you click this select an element item, you can use this to hover over elements on your page. And the reason why this is important is because Chrome shows you on the page like how much area your object or item is taking up and how much margin you have around an element, and then how much padding you have around an element. So we'll see what padding looks like in the future when we get into CSS, most likely. But for now, just know that when you highlight these items in Chrome, this kind of beige color or puke color, whatever it is, represents a margin. So margin is actually something you can define using cascading style sheets. So this is a default margin of what a paragraph tag looks like when rendered in Google Chrome. This is how much space a paragraph tag would take up. So the actual text, while it's only just this one line here, which is indicated by the blue highlight, the puke color highlight indicates how much margins around it at the top and bottom. Now notice on the left and right sides there's no margin, but only at the top and the bottom of this tag. So all the paragraph tags take up exactly the same amount of space in Chrome by default. And you notice that for your H1 through H5 tags, the margin is actually slightly different on each one of these. Then you notice the margin actually kind of decreases a little bit, or increases a little bit, I should say, as you get smaller, because of the fact that your text is decreasing, the text size or the line size is decreasing, so your margin is actually getting wider. But it's still taking up the same amount of space. Actually, I take that back. It's not. Oh, I see. Yeah, I see what it is. Because of the text size is smaller. But the margin is basically taking up the same block of space or the same area regardless. So it's something neat to play with. And again, like once we get into other elements, I'll show you. This will come in handy for showing how Chrome is rendering this content. So the next tag we're going to move on to is the div tag. So a div tag just basically defines a section in a document. A div tag is basically more or less to represent like, here's a space in a document that I'm going to take up, and its div tag takes up the minimal amount of space required in order to display the content within the div tag. So this is a paragraph in a div tag. And again, you can follow along with me if you want and type this stuff out. I'm sorry if I'm moving too fast, but again, feel free to pause the video, guys, and just follow the example and save it. And if you don't want to know what the answer is ahead of time, when you think I'm going to jump to the answer and show you what the outcome is, go ahead and pause the video and take a look yourself, and feel free to browse ahead. So I saved this document, and so I created a div tag. And based on what I just described, what do you think is going to happen? How do you think Chrome's going to render this div tag in contrast to, let's say, the paragraph tag or even the header tags? So I'm going to go ahead and refresh this document. So now I've got a div tag, and so, hey, this is a paragraph and a div tag. Well, it looks just like all the other tags, right? All the other content in the paragraph tags or H1 tags, right? Wrong. So if we use our element selector, we'll notice that the paragraph tag actually creates this margin between it and the div tag. So the div tag is pushed down because this is reserved space in the div tag. But notice that when rendered, Chrome only takes up the necessary space required for the line of this div tag. So anything below this div tag will fall below this line. There will be no wrapping or anything like that. So back when we had the example when we typed text that wasn't in between a div tag or a paragraph tag, even that text, if you put that below the div tag, and we'll show it. Text test content below div. Even though I put that below the div tag, it's going to format, it's going to put it below the div tag because that space is reserved. And if you notice, this test content is actually closer to the div tag as opposed to like if I put this below a paragraph tag, again, because the paragraph tag has margins and it helps separate the content in that regard. So that's why the div tag content has this margin above it is because of the preceding paragraph tag. Below it, the div tag, remember, has no margin surrounding the actual div tag itself. Therefore, anything that follows it, even another div tag, would just fall on the immediate next line. So if we wanted to take this div tag, or we wanted to put this in a div tag below that, if I refresh this or reload the page, you can see that there's two div tags. It's not just content stranded on an island in the body tag somewhere. It still takes up the same amount of space as if I had just put it outside of it. And again, like, this is why I say, like, any content you put in your body, you should always, like 99.9% of the time, I can't think of necessarily the 0.1% where you wouldn't do it, but the 99.9% of the time, you should have your content in some type of HTML tag. And I know I may sound like a broken record, but the reasoning for that is not only just this, but it also applies to style sheets, cascading style sheets, which we get to later in the course. And without having those things in HTML tags, it makes it so much more difficult to format your content in a way that can be different. You can differentiate between certain tags, various tags. So that's div tag. So again, div tag is basically just to block that line. So if we had a bunch of text in here and it wrapped, the div tag would cover that whole block. So no matter what you put after a div tag, it's always going to drop to the next line. It will never wrap the following content following that div tag or outside the div tag. Next, we're going to move on and look at a span tag. So a span tag basically just says, like, define this area of text, or just define this area, and I'm going to put something in this area. So it could be text, it could be an image, it could be a button, it could be anything that you really want it to be. But yeah, just know that a span tag just basically says reserve this area for something. So span area, we'll just call it, and again, span has closing tags. Now let's go ahead and refresh our document. And now again, you'll see span area. If we hover over span area, now notice how that's different from a div tag. So div tag takes up the whole line. A span area only just takes up this particular section. Oh, and also notice that if I didn't point this out before in your elements, in the elements tab, instead of sources, if you click on elements, as you hover over elements, that's another way to scroll between the elements, or click the element selector and then select the specific element. If you seem to have lost track of where your source code was displaying and you don't want to see this, you can always click on the sources tab and that'll just show you again your content, and no goofy behavior will happen as you hover over your content. But either way, so we're gonna look at use the elements tab here. So we click on the span area. So notice what real estate this is taking up. There's no margins. You don't actually see it go to the end of the line like we do with a div tag. So if you want to pause the video and answer this question, what do you think will happen when we put another span tag here? Let's go ahead and refresh the page. Oh, it went side by side. So a span area, it truly is just an area reserved for that particular element on the page. Again, I don't want to just say text, because you can put other things in between in a span tag, and you most likely will put other things in span tags. But This is just to prove how the span tag works. So a span tag is basically just define an area for whatever I put in it and only take up just that area. Anything else that is defined after it will wrap on the same line, or could fall on the same line as your span tag. So that's something you want to keep in mind. So if you had, maybe for whatever reason, if you had two of these, let's take into account like our div tag, for example. Let's complicate this a little bit, but not really that much. So let's put a div tag around our span tags. And remember what I mentioned earlier about indentation? I guarantee you, and again, this is small content, but if you were working with this day in and day out, do you think looking at this is a lot easier than looking at something like this? You can see your div and then you can see your span, so you actually can follow the indentation or your parent-child relationship just by looking at the way your content is formatting. Now, you also have the editor where you can collapse and all that kind of fun stuff. That's perfectly fine too. I actually didn't close my div tag correctly. That's why it wasn't collapsing correctly. But so now you have my closing div tag, and now my span content is directly within my div tag. So now what do you think is going to happen? I'm going to save this and I'm going to refresh this page. So now it's all on the same, it's all on the same line. But now, as you can tell, I have two span tags and with two different like pieces of text, but they all fall within the same line. So if I were to take another span tag, let's say, and put that outside of this div tag, span area 3, refresh the document, span area 3 is now a span tag, but just like the other, unlike the other two, because the other two are within this div tag where that whole section is reserved, now the third span tag is falling outside of that div tag and it will not wrap. So this is how you start to get creative with HTML. This is where you actually get into how to format documents and stuff like that. And I'm not talking about formatting in terms of font colors and bold and italicize and stuff like that. I'm just talking about, just the general layout of the document. So we'll put it that way. I'll say layout instead of format, but to me that's kind of one and the same. So that's how you would format using these div tags and span tags. We're going to move on to link tags. So links are in a document, or if you've ever looked at any web page where you click on, they're mostly known as hyperlinks. For short, you just call them links. Essentially, a link is basically just a pointer to another document somewhere on the web. So it could be an actual web page, or it could be a document. A web page is a document, so they're one and the same. But it could be a web page, a PDF document, a picture, whatever it is. But that's link tags or hyperlink tags can point to anything. So here's what we're going to do. So to define a hyperlink tag, this is actually the first tag we're going to dive into, where you actually are going to be acquainted with HTML attributes or tag attributes. So all the other tags that we've worked with previously, it's basically an opening and closing tag, and that's it. And then all the other content goes in between. With a link tag, its opening part is just an A. So it's an anchor tag, basically. I think is the reason why they used A, is I think how it used to be called in way back when, an anchor tag. So you use A and then href equals, and then in double quotes. And we're just going to start with this for now, because really our first hyperlink doesn't really need to go anywhere, but I want to at least get this set up so you can see what to do. So we're just going to put YouTube in here /A, right? So this is our hyperlink tag. Now right now the href actually will define the URL to which you want this hyperlink to go when the user clicks on the hyperlink. So what the user will see is the word YouTube with a blue line under it, indicating that, well, usually it could be a blue line, and I'll explain more why it may not be. So let's go ahead and refresh the document and see what this looks like. So actually we have the span tag in here, so I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to get rid of this third span tag. And again, if you want to keep If you want to keep that span tag in there, that's perfectly fine. I just want to get rid of it because I don't want the extra gobbledygook in there. So YouTube, if I click on this, it's not going to take me anywhere because there's no location referenced or defined. So it basically just takes me back to the current page. So link tags can be used to do a couple of things. Again, link to a file or document on your own web server. And again, like if you don't know what a web server is, don't worry about it. It's not anything you need to know right now. But just think of it like if you had a link to something on your computer, let's say this link to a file on your computer, you could link to a file on your computer, or you can link to a file on someone else's computer. That's the best way to represent it without getting into too much detail. That's something for later on in the course. But for right now, essentially a hyperlink can link to anything. It could be on something on your own website or someone else's website. There's no issues there. So let's go ahead, and now we want this link to do something. So I'm going to put in here HTTPS www.youtube.com, and I'm going to save that. So I saved this document. Now I'm going to refresh the page and see. You can see right now if I hover over this in Chrome, just above my DevTools area, you see it says https://www.youtube.com. That means when I hover over this, that's where it's going to take me if I click on this hyperlink. So if I click on this hyperlink, I'm in YouTube. So I'm going to go ahead and click back real quick because no need to see what content I'm looking at on YouTube. Don't worry, there's nothing bad. That's essentially how a hyperlink tag works. Now you may have seen or visited websites. Oh, let me comment on this. So you may notice that on this page right now, the link is actually in this kind of purplish color. Well, by default, most web browsers, if not all web browsers, modern web browsers, automatically differentiate a hyperlink based on whether or not you visited the site previously or not. If you've ever done a search on Google, you may have noticed something similar. By default, if there's a page that you've never visited before, the link will show up in blue. But then if it's a website that you've seen before, or if you've clicked that exact link before, it will show up in that purple color, indicating that you visited that website. With cascading style sheets, we'll get into in the future, you can actually customize, although I don't know why you would. I mean, you can, but it just kind of, I think, confuses people, users of your website more than not. But you can use style sheets to make it so that like this is always blue and underlined, or you don't have any underline, or when they hover over it, it has an underline, and by default it doesn't have an underline when you're not hovered over it. And there's all sorts of crazy stuff that you can do with style sheets. And again, like it may be too much for something like a hyperlink, but traditionally a hyperlink is blue if the user's never visited that website or page before or document, and it's purple if they have visited it. So that's how hyperlinks work in HTML. Now, one thing you may have also noticed, which is another cool little attribute that you can use in the hyperlink tag in HTML, one somewhat bad design decision that people make on websites is, let's say this is my cool little website that I developed, and I have links to other pages on my website, but I have this one, or maybe I have a couple or a few that go to external websites. Well, I don't necessarily want when the user clicks on this to like leave my website, because the idea of me having my website and them being on my website is for them to look at all my cool content and not necessarily just taking them to someone else's cool or unique content. So one way to work with that is a hyperlink tag, has an attribute known as target. So there are multiple targets that you can use, but for the intent of this particular example, there's a predefined target that all browsers are aware of and can interpret. Target is _blank. Don't ask me why, because honestly I frankly don't know, but that's just the way it works. So this basically tells the browser that when the user clicks on this hyperlink, I want you to open this in a new tab or window depending upon the user's browser preferences. So if you ever customize your browser preferences, you may, whether you use Internet Explorer or Google Chrome or Firefox, you can usually customize your browser to say what happens when you click on hyperlinks. Either they open a new window or they open a new tab within the same window. Essentially, the browsers, you're not telling the browser anything about that here, but the browser determines what to do with this attribute here based on the user's preferences of their browser settings. So now if I go ahead and refresh this page, nothing is different about the link, but there will be a difference. If I click this link, bam, it pops open a new window. Excuse me, I closed the window real quick. It pops open a new browser tab in my case that took me to YouTube. And so what that allows me to do is that while YouTube's over here on this other tab, they can go visit that and be all cool and stuff, but then they'll close that. When they close that other page they're visiting, they're back on my page, or they can go back to my page just by flipping through the tabs. So that's one way to keep visitors on your website and not just direct them away from you. And then especially if a user is not like very technical savvy or just savvy at all with computers, they may not even know how to get back to your website. So the easiest way to keep people from forgetting where they came from, you basically just, anytime you have hyperlinks to especially external content, you make sure that you use this target attribute of the link tag, hyperlink tag in HTML to pop them over somewhere new. I think that's about all we'll cover for hyperlinks for now. There's other things that you can do in hyperlinks. You can put images inside of hyperlink tags, and basically instead of text, you can have an image in there, and maybe we can cover that real quick after this next example here. So the next thing we're going to work with is an image tag. So image tag is the second tag we're going to work with where you actually have attributes that you have to use. So image tag is IMG, so pretty straightforward. You need to define a source for your image. So I'm going to go ahead and just finish this off. And let me just check something really quick. I'm pretty sure that is, no, yeah, see, so, okay, so image, all right, so here's another, this will be an interesting thing too. So sometimes I tend to forget this, depends on how often you work with this stuff. So image tags don't actually have closing tags. However, for completeness, you can, even though image tag is per the HTML specification, does not have a closing tag, you can still close the image tag, but it has to be closed within the image tag itself, the opening image tag itself. And that you accomplish that by putting the slash at the end of any attribute you want to put in the image tag. So you wouldn't want to put the slash here, for example. That won't do anything anyways because it also needs the close angle bracket. So either way, you want to always make sure this is at the end before your closing angle bracket. So we define an image. Essentially, it has no source in here right now. I'm going to go back to my web page. I'm going to refresh this. Okay, so we do have an image, but it says the source is unknown because we didn't put an image source in there. So I was hoping I'd get like a red X or something. So what I'm going to go ahead and do is I happen to have a URL to an image that I copied. I basically did a random Google search and I found this is for thumbs up image. And this is one of the first ones that came up, was a picture of a thumbs up image. So I went ahead and pasted that in there. I saved the document. I'm going to refresh this page, and oh my God, there's this big thumbs up image. It's pretty big. I don't think if I put this on my website, I think a user might be a little irritated with me unless my website was www.thumbsup.com. Don't go to that website because I have no idea what that is, and you never know these days, right? But anyways, so there's that. One way for now, and again, I don't expect that you ever do this because this is something that would normally be handled through cascading style sheets. But this is a shortcut. It's something that you can do if you want. but I'm just telling you that normally you accomplish this through style sheets, and so I would refrain from doing this unless you just absolutely want to be not involve yourself as much with style sheets as you probably should. So one thing that you can define in an image is you can define a width. Width equals 100 and height equals 100. So I can specify the width and the height of this particular image, and I'm going to refresh the page. And now that I've done that, now my the width of this thing is actually 100 by 100. And you can see it's defined there. And then if you look where it's highlighted up here, you'll see that Chrome tells you it's 100 by 100 rendered. So we took that massive image and shrunk it down. Now, that more or less is just a hack to make this fit this particular example. I highly do not recommend taking images that are like 20 times the size of what you actually want to display and shrinking it down, because basically all this is doing is it's basically telling the browser, download this image in its entirety, and after you've done that, resize it. Basically shrink it to these particular dimensions, and that's what's happening. So while this looks like a small image that I'm downloading, this image might be 1 megabyte, for example, in size. But just because I'm displaying it at 100 by 100 resolution or size, whatever dimensions, the actual physical size of the image being downloaded does not change. The browser still has to download that entire big freaking image that we just saw and then resize and scale it essentially for the user. So I guess resize is a bad word. It's scaling it for you to 100 by 100. So if you actually wanted this same image this small, you'd actually want to use an image editor and appropriately shrink it down to the size that you'd want to actually display it as, or maybe something smaller, and then you stretch it out. So I want to throw that out there, because that is one gotcha in web development, especially when it pertains to images. Okay, so let's go back to our hyperlink example. I'm going to copy our hyperlink example. I'm going to put it down here. Now, actually, one thing you'll notice is that a hyperlink as well does not take up. It only takes up the same type of area as a span, whatever it needs to display the hyperlink, and that's it. Image does the same exact thing. So anything I put after this image or after a hyperlink is automatically going to show the next set of content on the same line, unless my next set of content is in a div or a paragraph or some other defining HTML tag that says, define this section to be separate from all other content. So what I'm going to do now, just for the sake of time, is I'm going to take the same image tag we put right up here, and instead of the word YouTube, I'm going to double click this in Notepad++ to select it. I'm going to paste over it. And now I have within my hyperlink tag, you can see it shows the open and the close. Within my hyperlink tag, I have my image tag. So just like I nested span tags and a div tag, or like h1 tags and a body tags, or all these other tags and a body tag, you could nest other HTML tags like a hyperlink and an image. Now you wouldn't want to do it. You can't do it the other way around, because an image doesn't have a closing tag technically per the HTML specifications. But we are giving it one here for the sake of clarity and for the sake of consistency. And I would highly recommend, I'm going to beat this to death, guys, like a dead horse. Always close your tags. Always close your tags. This sort of syntax here, and I'll kind of just touch on this quickly just so that you understand why I beat this like a dead horse, is that, again, it's more for, if anyone watching this is familiar with XML, which is a form of HTML, XML says that for every opening tag, you have to have a closing tag, and your document has to be well formed in order for XML parsers to parse that document appropriately. There's a technology known as XHTML, which is basically, what do you think? It's a combination of XML and HTML, which basically says every opening tag should have a closing tag and your document is well formed. So I would always recommend you always have opening and closing tags. So, which makes your website essentially XHTML compliant as well. All right, so now that we've got our new hyperlink tag, I'm going to go ahead and refresh this page. And now we've got 2 thumbs up. But now notice that when I hover over the first one, again, this was just a regular image. There's nothing there. But now in the second one, there's a link tag, which for whatever weird reason it shows that little gutter area down at the bottom. There's no text here, so there's no text for it to display. But there is an image in here, so it's going to display the image inside of that tag. And no matter where I put my cursor, as long as it's somewhere within the border of this image, it's going to change my mouse cursor to a pointer, just like it does for a hyperlink. And if I click that, it's going to open YouTube in a new window or a new tab. So that's how you can use images as well as a means. If you had maybe like a text in an image because you had some cool font that you wanted to use or something like that, or just text with an image embedded in it, or a special background or whatever the case may be, you could, that this would be a reason why you'd want to do something like that. Or just have an image that represents your link without any text. That's perfectly fine as well. So I'm going to go ahead and type next to my image in that hyperlink tag the word YouTube. So now I have YouTube space and then the actual image. I'm going to go ahead and refresh this page. And now I have YouTube next to the image, but notice that when I hover over the word YouTube, I can click this and it does the same thing as this link. This image still is not a hyperlink, of course, but if I can click on YouTube or I can click on this image because the image is all within the realm of the hyperlink tag. Why you would do that, I don't know, but you can. There's other ways to format that, but we're not going to get into that just yet. So I just wanted to show you what some capabilities are of hyperlink tags. The next, and the image tag, sorry. All right, so the next thing that we're going to go into is we're going to go into HTML. Actually, you know what? We're going to do this now because this will help show just another generic HTML tag. So here's another HTML tag that will allow you to put spaces between content or lines between content, not spaces, but lines between content. For some reason, like even if you're in a div tag, let's say you wanted another line, but for some reason you didn't want to use a div tag for whatever reason, there's other ways to do that where you could create multiple lines and separate your content without using a div tag or a paragraph tag. It's known as the BR tag. And BR, again, is one of those other tags that does not have a proper closing tag. So you don't never have an open BR and a closed BR like slash, BR. You would never have anything like that. You would just have BR with the slash at the end, basically saying it's opened and closed all on the same line. And again, per HTML specifications, technically just doing that is perfectly fine. But to be consistent and compliant with XHTML, you always want to close these tags. So I put a BR tag there, and for illustration purposes only, I'm going to type in some text down here just so that we can see, prove a point. So without this BR tag, if this text here, some more content would wrap up next to this thumbs up tag, and we would just continue appending more to the side of this thumbs up until we ran out of space, and then the browser would just wrap it for us. So I'm going to go ahead and refresh this page now. Now I put in the BR tag, and notice that now some more content actually appears on the next line. So the BR tag, and look, even Google just strips out the backslash. But again, it doesn't matter, or forward slash, whatever you want to call it. I forget what it is. Either way, it removes that slash from the BR tag because technically it's not in the HTML specification, but to be XHTML compliant and for consistency's sake, you should do it. But either way, so Google Chrome removes it, but either way, it still interprets it correctly, and we have our space in between our hyperlink tag and our additional content at the bottom. And that's exactly what we were going for. Now, I could take this and I could put in another one of these, and I can't remember. Sometimes this does something and sometimes it doesn't. So now I put in two BR tags right next to each other. And Now it created a basically a double spaced paragraph, if you will, almost between it. So I could have wrapped this in a paragraph tag and it would have done the exact same thing, because basically the same amount of margin that exists here is the same amount of margin that exists between these paragraph tags. So 2 BR tags are the equivalent of just wrapping something in a single paragraph tag. So that's the way that we can separate this content. That's what I'm going to do. I'm not going to keep that, but just so we can move on to the next example. So this next tag we're going to work with is known as the table tag. Now a table tag is designed for a reason of having content within it. Table tags alone do not accomplish anything. I could save this document and I can refresh this document and you don't see anything here. I've got a table in here and honestly the browser's like, I don't know what you're trying to do. Like, this is just kind of weird to me. So I mean, so either it's not going to do anything. A table tag is intended to have content in a table. So a table is exactly how you think of it. If you took Microsoft Word, for example, and let's see, let me show a quick example. I'll show you an example in Microsoft Word to reflect how HTML tables work. So if you were in Microsoft Word and you want to insert a table, if you've never done this before, you can insert a table and you tell it how many rows or columns, right? And then you tell it how many rows. So this is approximate to how HTML table works. So let's say I did want to have a table with, let's just say 2 rows and 3 columns, for example. So I'm going to delete this in Word. And again, this is just for illustration purposes to show what we're trying to accomplish. We're not using Word to accomplish anything here. So I'm going to move Word over to the side. So we want a table with 2 rows and 3 tags. So the question is, are 2 rows and 3 columns? So how do we want to accomplish this? Well, one way to do this is typically the first section you're going to have in a HTML document is, or sorry, not an HTML document, in a table is going to be the table header row. So you will define a table row, and the table row is defined using just a TR tag. A table row tag will also have a closing table row tag. Now, let's go ahead and we're going to copy this down here. So essentially right now we've defined a table with 2 rows. If I take this and I refresh my document, Google Chrome's going to actually render this slightly different than what we typed in. And this is where things get interesting with how web browsers can render your HTML differently. So Google Chrome might reference it this or render it this way, but Internet Explorer, Microsoft Edge, and Firefox will reference it possibly completely different. So Google Chrome actually took our table, and around our table it actually slapped on this table body tag, which we see is not even referenced in our actual file at all anywhere. But then within that, then it put the table row tag. So we do have our row tags and we do have our body tag, but you notice that in our document we still don't see anything in here, and that's because again our table is not completely defined. So within our table row tags, I'm going to go ahead and wrap these for visualization purposes only. It's up to you to decide how you want to format your content, but for me, again, I love to have indentation for being able to easily visualize parent-child relationships between my elements. So within the table row tag, each table row tag is going to have 1 or more table data tags. TD, table data. So a table data will have an open tag and a closed tag. So I want 3 columns in my first row, and I want 3 columns in my second row. Now, I'm going to keep tables extremely easy for now, and maybe give you some homework or something to think about for future, or mess with in the future, or after you're done watching this session. If you remove one of these table data tags from either section, the browser is going to do something a little bit differently. So But for now, we're going to keep this the way it is. Oh, and actually, we wanted to do something different up here. I'm sorry. We wanted to use a table header. So we want our first row to actually be our table headers, and that's TH table header. Again, some of these tags, most of these tags are pretty straightforward. Some of them, they're not intuitive, but most of them are. So we're gonna just do, for the sake of column names, column 1, column 2, column 3. Okay. Item 1, item 2, item 3. So we're going to type some data in the header and in the column, and the columns, or in the detail of the table. Now I'm going to go back here and refresh my document after I saved it, and now you can see I actually have content. I have column 1, column 2, and column 3. And you'll notice that because of the fact that we use this table header tag, Google Chrome has put these column headers in bold. And that's one reason why you'd want to differentiate your column headers from just your standard table data information. Your table data information by default is not going to be bolded, while your column headers will be. And the other reason why you might want to do that is for styling purposes in the future. We'll get into that later. But that essentially is HTML tables. Now I will show you one thing just to help visualize the table. So remember in Microsoft Word, our table had borders around it. You can do the same thing in HTML. And again, I'm only showing you this for visualization purposes. I would never recommend using this in real life application, or apply this in real life situation, because this should be handled using cascading style sheets. But you can do it now to help you visualize it if you don't want to just visualize it using developer tools. But if you do visualize this in developer tools, if you hover over each section of the table, you'll see that this table row is going to highlight that first row. If you highlight the header, it's going to highlight each individual header. The next row, the same thing for the table data. The body covers the same area as the table itself, and the table does not have any margins or anything like that in Chrome. And if you notice, similar to like a span tag or a link tag, a table tag does not take up the whole line. So what do you think that means? That means that any content you put after the table tag, in theory, should wrap next to it. So if you want to use line break tags, or aka BR tags, you could just consider these line break tags, or new line tags, more or less, to create new lines between different content. You could put a BR tag back there, or you could just put your table in a paragraph or in a div to make that content, to organize that content. So that covers, let me see, does that cover everything you want to show? Oh yeah, so we saved this document border equals 1. So border equals 1 is basically a old school HTML way of saying show a border for this table. It's basically a bit value. By default, border equals 0. You'll never see that rendered anywhere in Chrome unless you specify it. So behind the scenes, it's actually going to tell you the border is non-existent. But now since I put it border equals 1, I'm going to refresh this page, and when I do that, now I have this big, thick, ugly looking border around my table. If that's your cup of tea, then that's perfectly fine. Go ahead and do that. But again, I would say don't use this tag. If you want to use borders, that's perfectly fine. But borders around tables, just like everything else, is normally accomplished through style sheets, and that's the way that you should do it. So that is the extent of I want to go to the HTML tables. Now I'll show you, we'll just show this just for whatever, do this. So I just basically removed one of my table data tags. So now I have 1, 2, and 3, and then 1 and 2. I'm going to go back here and refresh my document. Now you'll notice that Google Chrome gracefully collapsed this third cell in the table. In the past, and depending upon the browser, each browser is very different on how it treats it. Some browsers may kind of wig out about this because technically all your columns, you should have the same amount of columns in every single row within that specific table. There is a way to actually work with this where you could make this, if, let's say you wanted the second item to span 2 columns for some reason, you could do that in HTML. But I'm not going to cover that right now because the odds of you using that anytime in the near future is probably very rare. And you can spend time looking at one of the resources I'm going to give you at the end of this session to go ahead and do that and look that up yourself and spend time, just kind of furthering your knowledge on HTML. We're going to go ahead and we're going to put in some BR tags here to give us a little space after our table. And remember, we'll open this page back up and show you this is what we have right now. So this, remember, the last thing we did is we had our tables and columns, and we removed that third column. But so anyways, now we're gonna put some space under that table now. So what I would like to do is show lists. So you may have been on a website before and you've seen like where they list, or even like in a Word document or anything like that, you type up and you say, this consists of these items, and then a colon, and then you would put in like some dots or some special, different characters other than dots to represent some type of list, or an ordered list where you have numbers that represent, a specific order. So in HTML, with HTML, you can do something exactly similar to that for the most part. So let's go ahead and we'll show the first one. So there is a tag known as UL, which stands for unordered list, and it does have a closing tag. Now, an unordered list tag alone provides nothing. So this is basically just the similar to like a table. You have opening and closing tags, but it's expecting there's content inside. And so I'll go ahead and refresh this page just to show you what I mean. So you can see that Chrome shows that we have an unordered list here, and it actually takes up space. There's actually a margin around it, but there's actually no content in there because we need to actually specify what the content is. The way to specify content in an unordered list is you use the tag li, which li stands for list item. So within an unordered list, you have list items. So you would put item 1, and we'll copy this, and just so that you can see multiple items, item 1, and then we'll just say item 2. Okay, save that. Now we refresh our document, and now we have item 1 and item 2. So now Chrome can render, the browser can render our list items, and notice it just has the little dot next to it. There's no number. It's not an ordered list. So this is an unordered list. Unordered list doesn't mean that whatever order you put the list in is how Chrome or the browsers are always going to display that content. So it's the only real difference between an ordered list and an unordered list is that an unordered list uses these dots by default, whereas an ordered list uses numbers by default. And we'll always use numbers. With cascading style sheets, so if you're similar to using Microsoft Word, in Microsoft Word you may know that you can customize these dots to be different, images and stuff like that. Well, with CSS, cascading style sheets, which we'll learn later on, you can actually customize these things to be different, images or whatever it may be that you want to do with them. So you can give it a different look or something a little bit more advanced than what you see by default. So if you look in Chrome now, you'll notice that if we hover over our UL section tag, you'll notice that there's a margin at the top and the bottom indicated by that kind of beige color. Now, if you notice, for the first time, we are seeing this green color to the left of those dots in our unordered list. That is known as a margin, or padding. Sorry, not a margin, padding. So in Chrome, the green stands for padding, and the The beige color stands for the margin. And you can also see that in Chrome, it actually explains that to you as well. I forgot to mention this earlier. Chrome actually explains this to you as well. Now that I'm over my hovered item, if I hover over, just drag over image, it'll show that. If I have border, there's no border. But I hover over this is just the padding, and then this is just the content within that. So Chrome actually shows you like the different layers in there. But this is how you know what green stands for and what that little beige color stands for. So that's that, and then each list item takes up its own line, and again, that's just default in Chrome. We didn't have to do anything special. Every browser is going to treat this pretty similar. The spacing and the padding might be a little different. Even the margin may be slightly different. But every browser is going to treat an unordered list and an ordered list the same way in terms of how it's displayed by default. So we're going to go ahead and copy this for the sake of time. And we're going to look at how we do an ordered list. So an ordered list is basically, instead of a UL, you use OL. So we'll change our opening and closing tags to OL. The list item is still the same. So that tag will still remain the same whether you're in an unordered list or an ordered list. A list item is a list item is a list item. So really the tag that groups those list items is what dictates what type of list it is, and that's it. So now that we've saved that document or refreshed this page, and now we have an ordered list. And as you can tell, an ordered list has similar padding to that of an unordered list. The padding is pretty much identical, but you'll notice that the number 1 and number 2 seem to be, and the dot that follows it, or the period that follows those numbers, seems to be a definitely closer in padding compared to the dots above. So I don't know, just something to note. But other than that, I mean, basically this gives you an ordered list. So whatever order you put it in, notice I didn't put a number next to any of these. I could call this item A, or let's call it item Z, and we'll call this item A just to show. I mean, the numbers mean nothing. So I refresh the page, I have item Z and then item A. Z is 1, A is 2. So the numbers that I have in the content mean nothing to the browser when rendering this. You shouldn't. So you wouldn't want to necessarily create something where you put numbers. If you want to put numbers in front of something and list it out in a similar manner, then you probably want to use an ordered list. If you just want a list of items, just for generic, to represent like some type of generic list of items that aren't really meant to indicate any specific order. Like if you had like a recipe or something, you need this, and this. That doesn't tell you the order that you need to acquire the ingredients, but it just tells you here's a list of things that you're gonna need, right? An ordered list might be something. Step 1, throw in this ingredient. Step 2, throw in that ingredient. So that's kind of the context in which you would probably want to use these lists. Now, lists and order lists have other purposes that we may get into later when it comes to formatting a page and rendering content a specific way, but I just want to touch on that now to let you know that there are reasons why you would use this and not for just these two purposes only, but we're not going to cover that right now. That's something we'll dive into later. So the last thing that I want to show you, one of the other pretty basic HTML tag, and it's not even really an HTML tag. It's actually, it is a tag, but in a sense, but they have a thing in HTML known as a comment. So a comment is basically a way for you to put content into your HTML that doesn't display anything to the actual end user themselves, but it's something that it's like a reference for you in your HTML code. I say code loosely, but essentially in a way it is code because it is a language, but not code. So the way that you define an HTML comment, or the beginning of an HTML comment, is a less than sign or less angle bracket, exclamation point, and then 2 hyphens close together. If you put spaces in there, it's HTML, the browser's not going to render it the same. So everything has to be close together. So spacing is important in that case. So if I wanted to say like, you know, here are my list items, and then to close the HTML comment, you put 2 hyphens again, and then a greater than sign or a left right angle bracket. So that basically defines an HTML comment. So I save this document, and if I go in here and I reload this page, notice I'm not going to see anything different here, because again, it's only meant to be a comment for the developer of the page or whoever wrote the page, just to help keep things straight. And this is something that we'll dive into like later on in this series when we get into actually writing code like JavaScript or other programming languages. Comments become useful for just keeping track of like what you were trying to accomplish, or just some notes that you could use. I don't normally see web pages, or have I ever written web pages where I've normally wrote a lot of HTML comments, if any. HTML comments, if you have just like a big website with a lot of content, or one page with a lot of content, it might help you keep things straight and organized and for neatness purposes, but I've never had much practical application for HTML comments. All my comments that I've written have always been in code, JavaScript, C#, PHP, you know, you name it. You know, those are where your comments go usually, because that's where a lot of logic exists. There may be reasons why you want to use comments, and you know, I'm not saying just because I've never used them doesn't mean you can't use them. If you're starting out, it might just be helpful just to have comments to keep yourself sane. And then once you become more familiar with the language, then you know, you don't necessarily have to use comments as much anymore, or you just make it a standard practice for yourself to just use comments. You know, whatever you want to do is fine. I hope you learned something watching this video. We covered a lot of the most useful HTML tags for displaying content. We also learned about Google Chrome developer tools and how it can help us visualize how the browser is rendering our content. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to leave a like, and if you want to see more of these in the future as I publish them, be sure to subscribe to my channel and turn on notifications. If you have any questions regarding the video, be sure to leave a comment, and I will do my best to reply to as many comments as possible. If you know others who would enjoy this series of videos, be sure to share my channel with them. Stay tuned for HTML Part 3 coming soon.